Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to another video. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the pond-bred guppies that I have in my 30-gallon tank right now. They're feeding on some frozen bloodworms. So I built this cone out of plastic canvas mesh that's usually made for, I believe, like sewing or what's that other thing called? Or knitting. It's used a lot in the hobby. So you can make dividers out of it. I have some on my input of my tank. Input. The input of the canister filter. That way I don't suck any fish in. So this is one of the things I built with it. Instead of going out and buying these cone things for like $5 that they sell at the pet store, I made my own. Very simple to do. Just cut into a little triangle, fold it over itself, use some fishing line to keep it together. It makes it much easier to feed them since as you can see, that guy just grabbed the worm and swam away with it. So you're not making a giant mess with the worms all over the place, and they eat them as they go. So I have a couple topics I want to talk about in this video, and the reason, because of it, or due to it, just get comfortable here while we get into these topics. I have a whole list over here on my computer, so I don't forget what to mention. So I've been getting a lot of questions about setting up tanks for guppies, how many you could have in certain tanks and breeding and all that kind of stuff. So I set up a list of questions I want to address in this video to hopefully help everyone who wants to get into guppies and how to set up tanks. So my first question was, how do you set up a guppy tank? And to be honest, it really depends on your intentions. Do you plan on just keeping them? Do you plan on breeding them? Are you going to keep just males? Are you going to keep just females? So first, I'll describe and show you my tanks and my intentions on them. So let's go over here to this one, because this is the main breeding tank for the Superior Reds. So this is a breeding tank. What I have in this tank right now is this older male on the left and that younger male in the back who's just starting to get color. And I also have, right now there's only 2 females in this tank, the other one's up there, because the third female I have had in that tank should be giving birth to fry soon. So she's in the half-gallon nursery or breeder boxes that I have set up. Alright, so filtration. For this tank, as you can see in the back, it's just a sponge filter powered by airline tubing. All 4 of my tanks are hooked up to the same system. Air system, not water. Just air. The water never touches from one tank to the next. But for this setup, since it's a breeding tank, I like to keep it bare bottom. So any of this uneaten food, I could easily just grab a hose and suction it out without having to grab any gravel or sand or any substrate that's in there. I also like to keep plants. Now, the plants I go for is usually Java fern, which right here it's the Winlov Java fern, and some Java moss in the back. Now, these are both low-light plants, easy to grow, and they help actually filtrate the tank, for one. And 2, they give a spot for the fry to hide in. So this brings me to my second question, is how many fish to keep per tank? Now, this really depends on your experience level. So I like to separate it into 2 categories. So you have your experienced fish keepers who have been in the hobby for years and know exactly what to do beginning to end in detail, and then the inexperienced. So I don't mean like you don't know what you're talking about, but what I mean about that is you're new to fish and you're still learning how to keep fish. Now, for an experienced fish keeper, what I would say for guppies is it's perfectly safe to have 1 guppy per gallon of water. So this 5.5 gallon tank holds 5 fish. I could even have 6 fish in here. Now, obviously, when you set up a tank, you want to know the nitrogen cycle. If you don't know what the nitrogen cycle is, go to Google. It's your best friend. Very, very important to know the nitrogen cycle. I've had a lot of people go, well, if I'm buying fish today, can I go out and buy it? Well, if I'm going out to buy fish tomorrow, can I go out today and buy a tank, set it up, and it be ready to go? Well, yes, it can be ready to go, but you shouldn't put fish in it. It's not cycled yet, so the whole nitrogen cycle hasn't been done. So definitely check out the nitrogen cycle. It's not a one-day thing or a weekly thing. sometimes could take up to months to cycle a tank, depending on your approach to it. So that's that for the breeding tanks. Then they have show tanks if you want to keep fish in there. And for a lot of the inexperienced fish keepers, I wouldn't recommend mixing males and females. A lot of people, when they keep guppies, they go for guppies because the only fish tanks they could keep are usually smaller tanks. So usually what you see is like a 10 or 15 gallon tank. Sorry if that got really loud. I just moved the mic and I put it like directly in front of my face. All right, so they go for a 5 gallon to a 10 gallon tank. As I mentioned, for experienced fish keepers, they usually keep 1 fish for every gallon, regardless of the whole fish per gallon, inch of fish per gallon rule. Inexperienced fish, I wouldn't recommend more than 1 fish for every 2 gallons. So if you have a 10 gallon tank, I wouldn't recommend anything more than 5 guppies. If you're experienced and you do your water changes all the time, you understand your whole water chemistry, there's nothing wrong with keeping 10 guppies, or even some fish keepers I've seen have like a 30 gallon tank with 80 guppies in it. I would never push that much. I honestly don't feel comfortable with that. So yeah, about that. So for new fish keepers, I wouldn't recommend more than 5 guppies for a 10 gallon tank. I get that a lot. The most common tank people ask about is a 10 gallon tank. So I always tell them I wouldn't recommend anything more than 5 guppies in there. Usually 1 male or 2 males and 3 females, that kind of thing. But if you don't want, but mixing the sexes together, you're eventually going to get overrun with guppies. They breed like crazy, and they quickly will outgrow the tank, population-wise, not size-wise. So what I would recommend is if you have a smaller tank like that and it's just your only tank, go for the same sex. Usually males are the ones that are the colorful ones that everyone goes for. So buy 5 males. Once your tank is cycled, throw them into a 10 gallon tank, and you're set to have a nice little show tank and have your own little pets. So yeah, so that's that. So if you ever do mix sexes in your tanks, make sure you have more tanks to go in case you want to move some fry out and reduce the population, or have somewhere to sell them. Let's go to the next topic. We got that, we got this. All right, next biggest thing I get asked is, how often do I feed my fish? Well, I recommend feeding more often, but smaller amount of foods. I've noticed you get less waste. A lot of people have mentioned that my tanks are usually pretty clean on the bottom. So if you look really closely in this tank, there's a hand print because that's on the bottom of the tank, but the only waste you see is in the back over there by the shrimp, and that's where the filter is sucking up all the junk that's in there. I only do my water changes once a week, and these tanks are due for a water change. So even this one, if you look at it, there's not much on the bottom. So what I do is I feed very small amounts, so whatever fish that population in that tank. So if this tank has 5 fish and this tank has 1 fish, whatever those fish could eat within a minute. So usually it's just a pinch of food, very small pinch, and I walk away. And I'll do that 2 to 3 times a day. The fish tend to grow a lot faster that way. They look a lot nicer, and your tanks are much cleaner. You don't see as much waste because the food, obviously the fish are full. The food's just going to sink to the bottom. It's going to sit there. It's going to rot. You're going to get mold in it. It's going to start increasing your ammonia in your tank. It's just a can of worms you don't want to be messing with. So feed more often, but less amount of food. Now the third question is, how often do I do my water changes? Again, really depends on your comfort level and your experience. The minimum I would recommend is a 10% water change every week. So if you have a 10 gallon tank, I'd be changing about a gallon every once a week. It also depends if you have a fry tank. Fry tanks get dirtier much faster because the fish are growing and you're feeding them a lot. Like a guppy fry tank, I would be feeding 6 times a day, smaller amounts, but the fish don't eat it all the time, so I clean them more often. I have a turkey baster for that, where I suck up a lot of the uneaten food, because you always want them to have a constant supply of food. The more food fry have, the faster they'll grow. So for a regular inexperienced fish keeper or someone that's getting into the hobby, the minimum I recommend is a 10% water change per week. Personally, I don't do that. I do a 50% water change per week, and that's just how I've gone about it. There's not really a specific reason why I do that. Let's focus over here on the shrimp tank for a little bit, because these guys, their population is getting big. There's not a really specific reason why I do that. I used to do 10% water changes every week, and then I increased it. But the thing is, you have to do this slowly if your fish are not used to it. If they're not used to having water changed that much, that great of a volume. If you have a bigger population of fish, so if your tanks are overstocked, say you have a 60-gallon tank, and if you have a 30-gallon tank and you have 60 guppies in there, I do water changes either more often or a larger water change. So if anyone doesn't agree with that or has any input to put in on that, make sure to comment below with that information. So those are really some of the most common questions I've been getting lately. And I thought I'd address them in a video. Usually they're through emails. So if I answer one person and someone else has the same question, they don't get to see that answer. So yeah, I definitely wanted to make a video about that just to help out. People want to know how to set up guppy tanks, and if you guys still want me to make a video on how to set up a guppy tank, I could definitely do that. Even though I think I explained it pretty well. You don't really need too much if you plan on breeding fish or even keeping them. The only difference I'd make if you were going to just keep guppies is add some substrate to a tank and throw some plants in there. And you're really set to go as long as you have filtration. For breeding tanks, I like sponge filters. They don't suck up the fry. They're cheap. You just buy a pump and you could filter all these 4 tanks for probably, the pump was about 20 bucks. Each of these filters I bought for about $5, so that's 5, 10, 15, 20, that's about 40. Airline tube, about 45. So I'm filtering 4 tanks, and that air pump up there could power up to 100 gallons of water, and this is only 22 gallons. So I could filter a lot more tanks. It also depends on the depth of the water and all that, so it changes a little bit, but air filtration is probably the cheapest way to go. If you have just a male tank of guppies, you could even use a filter, hang-em-back filter. That's what I used to do. This tank over here is filtered with a canister filter. So your filtration options are really up to you and whatever you want to do. Again, these are just topics I wanted to mention based on questions I've been receiving. So, if you guys liked anything I mentioned in this video, make sure to comment below and hit the thumbs up button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out my Patreon. I already got one Patreon on there, and that's awesome. So I want to see if I get more people go on there and support the channel, even if it's just $1 per video or even 50 cents per video, so I can get some more projects going on for you guys on here. And that's really it. So if you want me to make a video on how to set up a guppy tank, I could always take one of these guys apart and set it up as I'm getting fried this week. Again, make sure to hit that subscribe, guys. Till next time, have a good one.